The Senate Foreign Relations Committee had a nomination hearing for Riley Barnes, a former U.S. State Department official who has been tapped to serve as the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Well, during his opening statement, Barnes highlighted comments that were made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in his first remarks to State Department employees. And in those opening remarks, Secretary Rubio had talked about how all men are created equal. And he said, because our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws or our governments. Well, back to the hearing yesterday. One of the hearing individuals, Senator Kaine of Virginia, he took issue with that. Look at this clip.
You state, and this is a quote from Secretary Rubio, our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish, Muslim American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities.
Wow. I don't know what else to say. It sounds like Senator Kaine needs to do some reading, at least, and not just of the Bible. He needs to read some of our historical documents. What does Senator Kaine need to know? Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation with Dr. Matt Spalding. He's the Kirby Professor of Constitutional Government at Hillsdale College and the Dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale's Washington campus. And as Vice President for Washington Operations, he also oversees the Allen P. Kirby Jr. Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. Dr. Spalding, welcome so much to Washington Watch.
It's great to be with you, Jody. Thanks for having me on this interesting occasion, shall we say.
Yeah, I've been chomping at the bits to have this conversation with you. So let me just throw it out here real quick. Was Senator Kaine anywhere close to being in the ballpark with his comments?
It's hard to know where to start with that conversation. It reminds me, if you recall every so many years, there's a nomination hearing. You might remember Clarence Thomas's, when Senator Biden went after him for making reference to the deity and natural law, and this was somehow demonic and problematic. His whole statement was so off base. It's hard to know what point to go at, but it does tell you a lot about kind of the state of where the conversation is about this understanding of the role of faith, but also reason, nature, all these terms which come back to and are centered in the Declaration of Independence. And there's a deep misunderstanding, and it's been developing over decades in how we teach, how liberalism looks at these, how progressive has looked at these documents, and I think we're now at a point where there's just complete misunderstanding of these very things. I mean, one thing that was kind of drove me crazy. He quoted, "Well, all men are created equal," but of course the very next line says, "and endowed by their Creator." It makes very clear that the source of rights are from the Creator. The Declaration has a clear theology to it. That grounds it in that. Now, but the key distinction, which he doesn't make and doesn't come out in the testimony because there wasn't enough time to draw this out, but the key thing Senator Kaine misses is that belief that our rights come from a Creator and we are all created equal does not necessarily mean theocracy. The key difference here is that all of those arguments of the Declaration are grounded in what they open the Declaration with, a reference to the laws of nature and of nature's God. That is the assumption of the Declaration, which, by the way, is the assumption of the New Testament, and you see it in Romans, for instance. The assumption is that there are certain things that man can know by his reason, by his thinking, by his created mind about God. That doesn't mean it's directly divine in terms of it's biblical per se, but it is in a general sense. It's a general revelation that we understand. And that's the basis of our rights. That's the basis of the whole Western tradition of the understanding of rights and human equality.
And doesn't it even go to the point that if you take his position that our rights and freedoms, liberties come from government, that's really the communistic, dictatorial, hardline regime mentality where government is God. They can give rights and government can take rights away.
That's the practical implication of it. And it's very clear that the founders never understood, never implied that our rights came from government. They wanted to get away from that. That was the grounding of parliamentary supremacy and the British tyranny they were opposing. But Senator Kaine's position also ultimately means, and it's very clear once he starts talking about what he believes in, well, we all believe in rights, but we have different opinions. That his understanding of rights is they're subjective. They're merely expressions of our will, whatever it might be. It might be one's sexual preference. It might be one's ideology. It might be one's belief about anything, for that matter. It's all a matter of relativism. That's essentially the modern liberal position that's taught in the academy nowadays. And I think we're seeing, Senator Kaine is really expressing a popularized version of that. It's an empty argument.
Yes.
And the stronger argument is the one in our founding itself, which we should be going back to, which appeals to both reason and revelation, the two great traditions of all of Western thought.
Absolutely. And it's the duty of government to secure those God-given rights for everyone. And it's just astounding that he said, and to think that he was a candidate for vice president in 2016. I mean, had Hillary won, we would have had this in the stunning.
Well, but recall here, I think what Senator Kaine is expressing is a common opinion in mainstream academic thought, but also mainstream kind of liberalism, if you will, about the source of these rights. One of the things we've lost. We talk about the problems of civic education and history, and we're not learning things anymore. But the key thing we have lost, the grounding, is really the argument that underneath all of this history, all of these concepts, all of these rights, or equality, consent, all of these things depend upon a source outside of ourselves, outside of history, outside of our particular subjective whims, outside of government. Well, what is that source? If you look at it over time, going back to the Greeks and the Romans, and then through the whole Christian tradition, it's this concept of nature, which then becomes God's nature in creation, and you see it expressed in the Declaration. It's not meant to be particularly sectarian. It's not Baptist or Catholic or anything like that. It's not Jewish. It's a general recognition of a creator and a creator God, who, by the way, is also a supreme judge of man's rectitude of his intentions. It's also divine providence. It's clearly there. And they want to so much get rid of that influence that they essentially erase it completely, as opposed to the founders' argument, which was it's not particular. It's not a fight between Catholics and Protestants or different forms and different beliefs. That's why we have religious liberty. But the ground of religious liberty is a common recognition by all men that there is something we can understand about the very nature of things, and that by that tradition and by the argument of the founders was that we have a recognition that we are not God, government is not God,
right?
But there is a creator. Doesn't say exactly who it is, what religion we should follow. That's our religious liberty, but it opens up the possibility of pursuing that religious liberty, which ultimately is what they meant by the pursuit of happiness at its highest meaning.
And well said, and of nature's God, as you referenced earlier. So let me throw this term into you, because the narrative from the left seems to always conflate words and ideas and so forth. But now one of the big phrases tossed around is Christian nationalism. And this really has to do a little bit with what he was jabbing at in his comments. So can you shed some light on that term and how you believe perhaps our founders would have characterized themselves as it relates to this term?
Sure. And again, there's a lot of background to this that we need to kind of think through. Modern liberalism, I keep using that term, which is that modern view of politics and man that grows over the 20th century that we associate with progressivism and liberalism, has long argued, coming out of the Enlightenment, that reason really means science, and revelation and religion is something to be avoided at all cost, and these things should be completely separated. And so anything that speaks of or touches on or shows a faith in that religious belief, they now term Christian nationalism. And there also are some, meaning some of our Christian brethren who see that as the only way to solve this problem is to actually have a more established church. Western tradition, which becomes the understanding of the American Declaration of Independence and the whole founding, which is that reason and revelation are actually friends. They work together. They don't answer all the questions. There's still great distinction between what revelation tells us and what reason or science might tell us. They're not always in agreement. There are certain truths we can't understand by our reason. But having said that, they're friendly on the basics. We are all created equal. None is born booted and spurred, ready to ride. We have certain equal rights, the most fundamental things, our lives, our liberties, our basic human liberty to act and choose and do, and to pursue happiness. But we can understand that, and we need to figure out a better way, and I would suggest the founders have given us that language to show how reason and revelation can work together. So the problem is on the left and certain portions of the right, they see these things at war with each other, and now they're taking sides. And I think Christian nationalism out of that. It's something the left uses to go after those who are believers, but it's also some place where some hide, I think wrongly, thinking that that's the way out of the problem. So I think that's an unfortunate aspect of the modern conversation that really misses the importance of the rule of law, the recognition of religious liberty, the understanding of fundamental rights grounded in the very nature of things, whether you believe that's from a rational tradition going back to the Greeks and the Romans, or whether you believe that's in a general revelation perfectly compatible with biblical Christianity, that we are all equal in the eyes of God. Right. The founders' whole purpose was to show that those two things come together and give us a grounding for free government.
Well, and I'm really glad that you made the distinction also. I'm glad you made the distinction also between a theocracy and the belief that we're talking about, that our rights come from God. They're not the same things. But without the religious and Christian foundation that we have in this country, is there any value to our rights even? I mean, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but give me your thoughts on that.
No, I think you're right. Without a grounded understanding of our rights, they are meaningless. They're merely our subjective will, which is where much of the modern academy and the left kind of wants to go. That's a deep fundamental problem. That is the problem, if you will. But it's not a theocracy to say that we believe that all men are created equal and we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. The beauty of what the Americans did, the founding, the Declaration, religious liberty in the Constitution, is to recognize that grounding, philosophical and theological grounding, but it doesn't necessarily make it that the basis of our rights. You have rights and I have rights because we are human beings. We believe that that's because God created us as human beings and created us equal. That's the core understanding. But it doesn't matter if one is a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim. You still have those fundamental rights, but it demands, it only makes sense if it's understood to be of a higher source, not government, not the Supreme Court, not the president, not Congress, a higher source, and that source is in the very nature of things, which in the Western tradition must be and really has always been understood to be a general sense of a creator God consistent with biblical Christianity over the course of Western tradition.
We've got to wrap it up right there. Thank you so much, Dr. Spalding, Hillsdale College, for joining us. I know you've got a book coming out in December, The Making of the American Mind. We've got to have you back to talk about that. Very timely, seeing our
Great.
250th anniversary is coming up. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch.